I'm Nariman Farvardin, president of Stevens Institute of Technology, and I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to Stevens. We have a number of special guests. I'm going to read the names of a few of them, but I know that I will be omitting a few others, so I apologize in advance. Mayor Dawn Zimmer, who is with us, and she's actually part of the program. Thank you, Mayor Zimmer, for being such a steadfast supporter of not only our city, but also our university. Hudson County Freeholder Anthony Romano. Anthony was somewhere around. Hoboken 6th Ward Council Representative Jen Gittino. Jen is sitting up front. The leadership team and the board of Hoboken Historical Museum, represented by Bob Foster. Many of them are here. And as I mentioned, I have a few other names here who I don't see in the audience, so in the interest of time, I will not be mentioning the names, but I welcome all of you to Stevens, of course, neighbors, alumni, students, faculty, staff, and all members of the community who have agreed to be part of the program tonight. I'm happy that we have an opportunity to come together. Some of you were with us until a few minutes ago at Hoxie House, the president's residence, and it's nice and sad at the same time that we are finding an opportunity to get together, but to commemorate a devastating event that occurred a year ago. Sandy arrived a year ago this time, and it really changed lives. It had a devastating effect for the community. It had a devastating effect on the states of New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and it really changed lives. And as I said earlier today, it really left an indelible mark in the memory of many of us. I am sure everybody in this room has some stories to recite about what they went through a year ago this time. Some of you know that actually I personally like these significant natural events. I like big snowstorms. I like serious rain showers. I had thought I liked hurricanes, but next time when I think about these events, I'll think twice, because I may actually get what I wish for. The event at Stevens was truly a memorable one. It created havoc. It created an unusual set of circumstances for us, and not only was it a memorable experience in the number of challenges that it presented to our community, but it was a memorable event in the opportunity it provided to bring the best out of our people. I saw that in members of the Stevens community. I saw it in our faculty. I saw it in our dedicated police officers. I saw it in the innocent eyes of our students, and I saw it within the city of Hoboken. People had become so incredibly selfless, if you remember. People were focused on the well-being of others as opposed to their own selfish needs. And I said how beautiful the world would be if we had a Sandy-like hurricane every week. People will be much more friendly toward one another. But of course, it would be nice to have that without a hurricane every week. I have many vivid images of the events that we experienced last year at Stevens, and I will not mention to you all of you, but let me just say a few of the highlights that are really engraved in perpetuity in my mind. Seeing teams from the Center for Maritime Systems on national media before the hurricane, during the hurricane, and of course after the storm. Multiple systemic and methodical daily briefings with status updates on the safety of our students on and off campus, the status of our power, the status of our water, the status of the IT infrastructure. Seeing the courage and compassion of campus police officers and the emergency response team. I remember our police officers we had meetings of the emergency response team several times every day. The first meeting usually started early in the morning, around 8 o'clock. And I remember our campus police officers would show up there, and they would bring each a box of donuts. It was such an incredible sense of camaraderie and good citizenship. Taking up a collection of cash to buy gas for emergency vehicles on campus because gas stations were not able to take credit cards anymore because they didn't have power, but they would still accept cash. But we were running out of cash ourselves, so people were taking cash out of their own wallets, giving them to our police officers so that they can take the cars and fill them up. Recognizing that some of our elderly, some elderly members of the community who were stuck on the upper floors of some of the neighboring buildings, they needed water, and mobilizing our students from the wrestling team to take big bottles of water and carry them upstairs. And they did this with such a positive spirit. I remember I heard multiple times that students in the wrestling team said, our coach always said, anytime you have an opportunity to exercise, take that opportunity. Watching our little Alison Atwater, where are you, Alison? Is she somewhere here? Hello. She was so incredibly involved with helping in every possible way, but she took a leadership position in the city hall, the command center. The mayor remembers that. The ingenuity of many members of our community in finding various types of workarounds for the problems that came up. I'll share with you one of the problems that is so vivid in my mind. In our main administrative building on campus where we have the dining hall, we had stored a lot of food, and we had an emergency power generator. So we thought we were all set in that building, in that we were able to provide power and food for literally about 1,000 students that we had on campus. Well, the power went out, and we quickly realized that our emergency power generator was not generating enough voltage, so it was useless. And then soon after that, we realized that, in fact, in that building, not only do we not have power, but we don't have water either, because in that building, water is pumped to the top floor in a water reservoir, and then it comes down. So the pump was not working, so we didn't have power, and we didn't have water, and that presented a very serious problem in that we couldn't provide food, nor could we provide opportunity for the students to go to the bathroom. And that combination was a very difficult combination. But we were presented with problems like this throughout the week. And I must say my hat's off to the members of this community. People never said, well, this is a problem, and we don't know what to do. They said, this is a problem, let's see what kind of a solution we can find for it. And problem after problem, we found solution after solution until the end of the week. The spirit of resiliency, community, and innovation that was inspired by the challenges we faced was truly unique and most memorable. And I'm hoping that tonight we will hear some of those stories from members of the Stevens community, but much more importantly from people in the city. As we were dealing with campus-related issues, and we were also sending our students as ambassadors to the city, I know that Mayor Zimmer and city services were doing very much the same in the city, thinking about the well-being of the neighbors, and the neighbors helping other neighbors to deal with the challenges that we were all presented. So I'm delighted that all of you could find the time to come to Stevens tonight to remember what happened to our community, to learn from the experiences of last year, and to become more prepared when in future we have similar events confronting us. At this point, I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming Professor Lee Wenzel, who's played a major role in orchestrating tonight's program. Lee, please come forward.
So a year ago, Sandy came. And tonight what we're going to do is we're going to use individual stories from this town to tell the collective tale, our tale, and to mark what the storm meant for us. During the days after Sandy, one image stood out for me, and it was this one. I took this picture on Bloomfield, just off 11th. It was the image of the charging stations that popped up all along Hudson Street and 11th. And in the normal everyday world, when our technological systems are humming along and functioning properly, this doesn't make sense, okay? There's no reason to do this. But someone had the vision to throw an extension cord out their front window and connect it to a power strip, and then invite people to charge all of their phones and everything else they needed to connect to their loved ones. And in academia, we call this innovation. And tonight, these kind of acts of charity and imagination that happened during the week after Sandy are what we want to remember. To begin Hoboken's story of Sandy, however, we have to actually begin before the storm came. And we have to do that because what many normal Hobokenites might not know is that Stevens is a center of studying storm systems and oceans that's very important to this country and this region. And many members of the Stevens community were busy communicating with media during the week that preceded it. And to try to capture this story, this is going to be kind of a multimedia event. You're going to have to excuse my hopping back and forth here. We talked to two members of the Stevens faculty. And first, you're going to hear from Professor Alan Bloomberg, and then from Dean Michael Bruno.
We have been very lucky here at Stevens to have had long-term support to learn how to observe the marine environment and to make forecasts of it. And our system has evolved into a state where every midnight we go back 24 hours and forecast real conditions for those 24 hours. And then when we come to midnight, then we go ahead and forecast into the future 72 hours. So we do this every night, and we're learning how to forecast. So every night for the past 3 or 4 years, we have been doing this, and I study the forecast. So Sandy was just part of our normal operations. And when Sandy started to evolve far down in the tropics, we were starting to see signs of it in our modeling in New York, New Jersey waters. So when it came, we were just doing what we always do. And we started to pay closer attention to it and get that information out to the public. Primarily, how much water was coming into New York Harbor and into Hoboken, for example, and the New Jersey coast. How much water was coming and when? And we were very specific in terms of our forecast. The Weather Service would say, for example, 4 to 11 feet. We would say 9. So we're academia, so we try to be a little more precise. And we were pretty accurate. The Weather Channel and Stevens matured during the event, where we started talking about if 9 feet of water was coming, what was it relative to? Was it relative to the land? Is it relative to high tide or low tide? And we became partners in that knowledge. Same with CNN, they learned as they went. My favorite story is with the Weather Channel. Their cameras were on the lower part of Manhattan, facing the Verrazano Bridge to the south, watching for the storm. And I said, why don't you take your cameras and swing to the west? I look at it as a learning experience for them and a teaching experience for us. So we develop a relationship together. The media has people that come and go all the time. Even the Office of Emergency Management, same thing. A lot of personnel change. So we're teachers. So we just keep teaching and get our methods better and better.
We all, that is we, the community, the scientific community, started following Sandy during midweek prior to the Monday landfall. So I would say around Wednesday we began to pay attention to the models. From midweek, from that Wednesday to Friday, it was really a matter of taking a close look at the various models. The storm became a serious concern when all of the different models began to converge on essentially the same solution, which was that the storm was indeed going to come up all the way up to the northeast, likely in the New York, New Jersey area. And so a landfall early the following week looked more and more likely. And we began to not only discuss this with the scientific community, our friends at NOAA, National Hurricane Center and elsewhere, but also some of the state and local officials. We told everybody we could to take this storm very seriously. And there were a lot of reasons for that. One was the magnitude of the storm. Also, storms tend to take on a personality, and that personality, believe it or not, really persists through the life of the storm. And this storm had caused a lot of rain, but it had a lot of wind, and it was very large in its extent. And so our concern right from the start was the wind field and the extent of that wind field over water. We began to tell people they needed to pay close attention. Well, I was in touch with the mayor beginning on the Saturday prior to the Monday landfall. She and I talked about every 2 or 3 hours starting on the Saturday. And on the Sunday, given the really heightened concern at that point, the mayor asked me to come into City Hall along with our chief, Griffin, and speak to the emergency management team that the mayor was going to assemble. So I went over to City Hall on that Sunday, that was late in the day on Sunday, and I walked everybody through what I thought was going to happen, what our models were indicating was going to happen in New York Harbor and in Hoboken. And when I was finished, it was still clear that for some, the urgency was not really pronounced enough. And there was some discussion about the new pump system and other measures, other comparisons with the prior storm, Hurricane Irene. And at that point, I did a couple of things. Number one, it turns out that people really cannot fathom a storm of this magnitude. You have to put it into context. Context is everything. And so I asked for a show of hands, essentially, how many people in that room had been here in December 1992, which was really the last time that the Hoboken Path Station was flooded. It turned out everybody remembered. So I asked them to imagine the water depth being 5, maybe 6, or even more feet deeper than that storm. That was when everybody seemed to get it. And when talk turned to other measures, including the pumping system, I really had to simply remind everyone, you can't pump against the entire Atlantic Ocean. The entire ocean is going to come into town.
And the ocean came. This is, you saw a bit of it in that video, but this is a computer model that Alan Bloomberg of the Davidson Laboratory here at Stevens has built of Sandy coming in to town. And I want to kind of give you, oh, there it is, okay. So I want to kind of show you what you're looking at. So there's a timestamp here in the bottom right corner, and then that thing in the middle on the bottom are the tides, okay? So here we go. It starts the day before. So right now we're kind of marching through the tides and the day before, and we're going through the high tide that brought Sandy in. And then because of the topography of our town, it stayed. Where were you that night? Were you sitting on your stoop when the storm came in? That's what everyone in my building was, sitting on the stoop and yelling about how weak the storm was because they didn't realize what was really going on in town. And or were you on Park Street or Willow, where my colleague Jim McClellan was, and you heard gurgling, and you tried to do something to resist the water coming in, but it came in anyway and flooded your house? Or were you on First Street or Jackson, and you were looking out the window, and the ocean flooded over your streets, and it surrounded your building, and then it stayed right there? Well, most of us were sitting in our darkened houses, wondering. Others were already responding to what was going on. And one of the people centrally involved in both planning for and responding to Sandy was our mayor, Dawn Zimmer. And I'd like to invite her to the podium to share her thoughts with us now. Mayor Zimmer.
So I want to start just by thanking Stevens Institute of Technology. Yes, Dr. Bruno and I were in regular conversations throughout the storm, and I just want to thank Stevens Institute of Technology and the Hoboken Historical Museum so much for today's events and offering us this tremendous opportunity to really reflect on the storm. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone in our Hoboken community, our public safety officials, our police department and our fire department, our OEM, our CERT team, our Hoboken Volunteer Ambulance Corps, our amazing Stevens students, and thank you again, President Farvarden, for telling every student, if you're not in class, you got to be over at City Hall. So we really appreciate that. It was just amazing to see how our community came together, and it's just such an inspiration to really, to reflect, and it's emotional to really reflect on and all that happened. As I think back to, before the storm came, this storm came and it was predicted, and I really appreciate, so many Stevens students and CERT team members. We made up flyers, and Saturday and Sunday, we were out knocking on doors and trying to warn people to, get prepared, to go shopping, to make sure you have water, to make sure you have flashlights, we had flyers in English and in Spanish, and we were doing reverse 911 calls, and we were doing everything we could. We were offering free transportation down to ShopRite to just try to get our whole community prepared. And we tried as hard as we could to reach everyone in any way that we could. But what I've learned, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned, and I want to thank the CERT team for really working with me on this, is that resiliency is a continuous process. It's something that we have to continue to really build into our everyday lives. It needs to become almost a part of our consciousness, where we're just, and I brought my Hoboken Ready Kit. I got it, and I'm ready. I'm bringing it home from the office, so I want to make sure that I have it. But my family, and I feel kind of bad throwing my husband under the bus since he's not here, but my family is kind of the big example that I have of how challenging it is, because, I knew that we were at risk, and I did call my husband. As soon as I put out that reverse 911 call, all the garages are full like that. And so he's like, so I called him, I said, listen, there's space in Newport. We called, we checked it out, we're providing transportation back from Newport. We want to make sure that everyone takes care of their cars. And he said, it was such a pain during Irene. We parked up in Jersey City Heights, and I just, we were fine with Irene. We didn't flood, and I think so many people in Hoboken said this. We were fine, and not only that, I already invited our friends to park behind us, so in addition to our car being totaled, our friends with their brand new car also had their car totaled. So, it's just something that, it's something that we all have to really build into our everyday lives, and it's a continuous effort, and I thank the CERT team so much for really working with me on really expanding our outreach. But I want to talk a little bit, about going into what the comprehensive plan is, but I want to talk to you about why I think it is, some of the emotional moments that I had during Superstorm Sandy, and why I think it is just crucial that we protect our city in a comprehensive way. We cannot raise our homes up on pilings, and we just have to protect. We're talking about the future of Hoboken. We have to protect our city comprehensively, and I want to thank Stevens Institute of Technology so much for working with my administration. They're doing they've done the modeling, and they're helping us to fully evaluate our proposed plans and what is the best plan. But we absolutely have to protect our city, and we have to have an energy resiliency plan as well, and I'm proud that we have a microgrid partnership that we're really working on developing. But I want to talk to you about some of the experiences that I had that kind of created that policy for me, and have made me even more determined. I remember when we were going and we were making rescues with the payloaders, and we had decided that for whatever reason, like the National Guard, we keep calling, they're not here, and we had to make a statement, really to state government that we just need you here. We need the National Guard here. We need them to come in. And I remember just before CNN arrived, this grandmother came up to me, and she was just in tears, so worried about her infant twin grandchildren, and wanted us to please go and rescue them. And so I thought, well, maybe what we can do is we'll go and we'll do this rescue with the payloader and do a rescue. And then I just remember having to turn to her and tell her, I am so sorry, but the payloader cannot fit down that street. We cannot get the payloader down that street. And she just broke down in complete tears, and I just remember that experience of feeling like I want to help, and right now we can't help with that payloader. I remember when the National Guard came in, and they came in, I think it was Thursday night, and they came in like 11 o'clock at night, and we drove, we went with them, and we drove. We wanted them to get the lay of the land, and it was just pitch black, and I remember everyone, there was many people kind of leaning out their windows and cheering and thanking us, and I remember just thinking, where's that emergency? Where's that person that might be having a heart attack? Where's that senior who's on oxygen? Where's that parent with a child that is very, very sick and needs our help? Where are they? We don't really know. And I remember just feeling so emotional in that moment, like I want to keep our community safe, and being so concerned about being able to do that. I remember when a Hoboken resident at a senior building, he came to me and he said, my grandmother, I can't convince her. She's on oxygen, she's running out of oxygen. Can you come? Can you help me? And I went over to Columbian Towers, and I was part of convincing her, listen, we can get you to a hospital. We can evacuate. That's the safest place for you to be. We want to make sure that you're totally safe. And we convinced her, and I remember him saying to me, you helped to save her life. She was in bad shape by the time they got her to the hospital, but she was saved. I remember when Brad Paisley's chef showed up with a boatload, just a truck full of food. It was pretty amazing, and I remember thinking, okay, we'll place him, over by Church Square Park. There's a lot of affordable housing in that area, and so they could sort of service that area. And I remember going and knocking on doors. We wanted people to know that this is here. He's planning on serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner for as long as he had food, and he had a lot of food. And I remember knocking on doors and talking to seniors, and this one senior, she opened up her door and she just started crying in my arms, and she said, how could they leave me? How could they leave me like this? There's not even an exit sign. There's no lights in the hallway. And I looked in her apartment and I saw about 20 candles lit, and that's how she had her apartment lit. And I thought to myself, not only is there no light in the hallways, but there's no fire suppression system. It just occurred to me that, like, we have fire hazards throughout the city, and it is amazing that we didn't lose anyone in Sandy. Just, it was amazing how the community came together. And as I think, about the community coming together, I have to say, when I think about we got food coming in from FEMA, and we had 2 huge, massive trucks coming in, and I remember Juan and I turning to each other and saying, like, I don't know how we're going to get these trucks unloaded, but we put it out on Facebook, we put it out on Twitter, and I went over to the high school, and within 30 minutes, we had 200 volunteers there, and I just remember this beautiful image of them, like, literally handing each other the food and stacking it up, and it gave me such an inspiration, just thinking about just humanity and how amazing it is when people really come together. I remember when I went around talking to seniors, and they were, saying to me, I'm about to run out of medicine. How will I get out to get my medicine? And I remember how the CERT team put together a plan to, they were going and getting the medication, bringing it to City Hall. We got doctors to volunteer. They were writing the prescriptions. And then CVS, we were able to help them get opened up. They were filling the prescription, and then the volunteers were running it back. And apparently our system was so good, we had people from Jersey City coming over to fill their prescriptions. So these are just a few of the things that come to mind that really just, drives me to feel that we have to protect our city. And, most recently, at one of our Hoboken Ready meetings, where I've been trying to explain what we're proposing to comprehensively protect the city and help residents to get prepared. One resident came up to me and she said, I spent $200,000 of my own money. I mean, I can't do this again. I live in fear every time I hear that there's a storm coming. I just cannot do this again. And so it's stories like that that drive me to say we have to protect this city comprehensively. We cannot go through this again. We cannot survive the National Flood Insurance Program. We have to get out of that. And for the future of our city, we absolutely have to protect this city comprehensively. So I thank Stevens so much for helping me to do that. I thank all of you for helping us to do that. And I look forward to working with the community to make sure that we protect our community going forward. Thank you very much. Okay, I want everyone to get your Hoboken Ready Kit, okay? Thank you.
Our first responders were also on the front lines, of course, and I wish we could hear from many of them tonight. We invited Joseph Faugneau, I think is how to say his last name, to come. He's Joey from Cake Boss, and unfortunately, we received a message a little while ago that Joey is in the process of fighting a fire right now. And so he couldn't make it, and I hope we can just hold it in our hearts that everything worked out for the best with this fire. I guess it's a message that life continues rolling on. The experience of Sandy was so varied. It's as varied as we are, right? And there's no way to capture that diversity, the diversity that is Hoboken. But we thought I'd try a bit, and so I want to introduce you to Maria and Madeline. You'll see Maria first and Madeline. They're both longtime Hoboken residents, and they live on the west side, and this is their story.
When Sandy came in, I was in my sister's house. She told me, like, spend the night with her because to not be lonely with the kids, so I spend it with her. I'm just like, when I come from, we know when the weather is so bad, and I figured out that when it starts raining, and don't stop. And every time it was like, see the water coming up to us, to the buildings. And we saw that like everything stopped, like oil was floated, no lights, and it was like, it was worse. Good thing is like the building that I was living, the water stopped in there. Like when it stopped flowing, it stopped in the park, and all those buildings around, see the cars like they moving, they floating, and we like see that from each car floating, buildings, people like in the house, no lights. We realized that sometimes we have neighbors and we don't know the neighbors as that we have a situation like this. And we start meeting because sometimes you don't know where's like the people, and we help each other. They come and whatever she have, whatever I have, where we cook and do the stuff together every like morning, afternoon, and dinner. There were people who help us. We thank for that because we see the neighbors. They are people that we don't know where they come from, but they been there, help us. Like we thank for that. And it was the Navy. I remember that the Red Cross. It was a lot of people to help us and realize some people that I don't know, it was there and help each one. Camilo Garcias, it was there. It was a lot of people that I see. I think I'm proud for each person to help each one, and like it come from you help little for little, and it become a lot. You know, even one person help, the other one help. Each one is getting like, Hoboken is getting strong every time that I see it. It's so beautiful, but you know, people help a lot, and that's real life. That's the more important.
I was home, and when it came, to me, the way it came in, it was surprising because we never seen anything like that. You know, lucky I live on the 5th floor. But Sandy, I think in my perspective, Sandy brought the community together after when they left. So even that we suffer a little bit, but in a way we also got to know one another as a community. For me, I think sometimes we have to experience things even if we don't expect them to be. So it hit me as day after day after day that we were suffering with no electric, that we had to learn to survive without what we had. Neighbors, we never thought of each other, like we always walked by each other, you know, but now since Sandy did the damage of the town, didn't do the damage of the community, so that's how we got to know, like if we knew the person needed something, they will come and say, you know, like Madeline, you know, come across the street and we have something for you. Or I have neighbors in my building that were old people that couldn't walk and they needed food, so I would go get them some food in the Salvation Army and stuff like that to help one another.
I think that the kindness and the generosity and The experience of neighbors reaching out to each other during this time was really common, and it's what we're trying to remember tonight. And one of the things that many of us recall, and we've already done so several times, are those people who really went kind of above and beyond, as we usually put it. I remember a few days after Sandy came, walking down Washington Street, and I was walking by Amanda's. And people there at Amanda's were bringing out all this free food, and they were just serving it to anyone who chose to walk by. And there was a crowd kind of gathering, and there were people talking, and there was this feeling there that I don't know if I can put my finger on exactly what it was. But that was my experience. As a kind of social scientist or a historian, I'm always wondering what's the other person thinking. So luckily for this event, I could go to Eugene Flynn, who owns Amanda's, and I could just ask him.
Actually, we were at home in Weehawken, and that night, the night and the day that the storm was so violent, we stayed home, and we came down Wednesday morning for the first time because they were trying to keep the people off of the streets and things, but I was so eager to find out what happened to our businesses. We have Amanda's restaurant, which is at 908 Washington, and the Elysian Cafe, which is at 1001 Washington. And as I was stating before, we're building a third restaurant, Schnackenberg's. We always feel that we can control things, and you know, here comes another storm, we won't move our cars, look what happened with all the cars. Things will be okay, we're gonna make it through this, but contrary to what people might say we're stronger than the storm, I think what could be clarified in that comment is our resilience and our human spirit is stronger than the storm. And how we felt coming down that morning, I was very nervous. I said, is our basement going to be flooded? Is all the food going to be spoiled? What's going to happen when I walk in? And the chef, and God bless this guy, his name is Rodney Peterson. He's worked for us for over 15 years now. He came from California. He's a CIA Culinary Institute, not the spy agency, Culinary Institute grad, and he just is about cooking and loving his craft and loving to cook. So he got there right as I did, and we held our breath and walked down into the kitchen, and were miraculously surprised we didn't get a drop of water. Little did I know that Washington Street is 25 feet above sea level, and that if Washington Street flooded, half of Manhattan would have been flooded, but we were nervous and we didn't know what was going to happen. We had no power. We saw that the walk-in boxes were still cold. We did have gas. The natural gas didn't stop. So we made an immediate decision right then and there that we don't know what's going to happen, but I want to cook as much as we can. And Rodney was there with me and said, let's do it. We took a couple tables and put them out front. Little by little, our neighbors came. And the first few that came were not just coming to say, oh, you have something to eat, what can I do? So the ability of people to work so hard to help other people was just amazing. In my mind, the best day I ever had in the business. It really was, because there were so many people, they kept coming. The first 40 or 50 clear tables that were set for dinner that were, certainly we weren't gonna have diners. We didn't know how long we weren't gonna have diners, but we knew we had food and we knew no one had any. My wife characterized it really well when she said to me one day, you know, young people in Hoboken are amazing, but they don't need money because the ATM machine will have the money. I don't need electricity, I have my cell phone. Little did we know that after 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, one day, 2 days, we weren't gonna have anything. And we had no power, but what people did that did have power was amazing. It was truly amazing. The generosity of spirit was the silver lining of the storm to me. I think it brought our community together in a way that it hadn't been since 9/11, and it was just great to see people working together. So it just showed that, you know, the things that we think are important. We lost cars, we lost furniture, we lost computers, things, but we got something much more in that our spirit was elevated and our sense of community was greatly enhanced.
Another amazing phenomenon that we've already noted here is the many thousands of volunteers who came out into Hoboken. And some of those volunteers were Stevens students, and you can imagine how very proud we are of them. In fact, as a professor at Stevens, I'd like to do nothing more than parade each one of them one by one over the stage and mention their names, but we don't have time for that today. So we interviewed Alison Atwater, a young woman, a Stevens student, who became the volunteer coordinator at City Hall. And what some of you guys might not know is that Alison is a very tough cookie. And she told me that there was no way that I was going to allow her video to play without also mentioning the people who helped her out at City Hall. And so she said, you're going to read these student names at this event, or you're not going to do it. So this is the deal, right? Here we go, Alison. Jacob Vanderbilt, Matthew Linden, Edward Kubis, Taylor Race, Gabriela Sanchez, Molly Dugan, Jared Crean, there he is up there, Trevor Batchelder, Emily Brandsdorfer, Russell Sims, and David Klejcik. And this is Alison.
I decided to volunteer the day that the storm ended. We were finally allowed to leave our dorms, and I decided that I needed to get out of there as soon as possible because I could not be in a confined space. I went down to City Hall because I saw on Facebook that they needed volunteers. Went down to City Hall and was thrown right in. I actually don't know how I became the volunteer coordinator. I still, to this day, can't figure out how. I was a regular volunteer the first day, carrying water up 8 flights of stairs at Marine View. And the next morning I came in at 2 a.m. to answer phone calls. And by 2 p.m. I was running around and giving orders that were given to me by other people, and it just spun from there. I'm not actually sure how it happened. It kind of fell on us to set everything up. We ended up really working with what we had, what little we had, and what we could figure out. I didn't know anyone when I was down there. I walked into the building and knew how to get upstairs from downstairs, and that's how I was given jobs. And we worked with what we had. We used our experiences, we used our knowledge and our skills. I pulled in people that I knew from the school and from the city that I knew were great workers and would work well, and we developed our own system on how to get everything going. And we'd spend our nights after we were done figuring out what to do for the next day. And we just went with what we thought was best. I lived down at the beach. I had a lot of family that their homes were flooded, family that was trapped in their houses that couldn't get out. I had friends whose homes were destroyed. I worked at the boardwalk and I saw pictures of the boardwalk 3 blocks down the street. My parents are first responders at home. I didn't have any communication with anyone. I knew that my home had damage. I knew that my family was out in the middle of the storm, the middle of the flooding, and that I had a lot of family that was really affected by the storm, and I couldn't do anything about it. So I just kind of went down and did what I could where I could. Looking back at Sandy, the feeling that really comes to mind is just that there's hope for me. I really get a sense of hope. I got to see so much good in humanity. 5,000 volunteers coming out from all over the place. People who decided that instead of going out and celebrating their birthdays, let's go volunteer. Even seeing at home all of the volunteer groups, everyone who's there to support each other, hearing stories from people. While some of it might have been bad, in the end, so much good came out of it. And so much is also being developed to prevent future things from happening like this. So in the long run, it's all hope, it's all positive, because I developed myself, I watched other people grow into themselves, and I've watched the community itself come together and grow.
And then there's those charging stations that I've already mentioned. I think it was incredible to see this culture develop so quickly in the course of a couple days. I'm a historian of technology, and all I think about most of the time is how people use technologies. And I remember I was staying a lot of time with my friend Andy Russell, a historian of technology, and fellow Stevens colleague, who lived on 11th Street. And I just remember walking up to him and saying, like, dude, like, there's these weird things developing where people are running power cords and coffee pots out to the sidewalk, right? And then, like, 2 days later, I walked around and counted 50 of them, right? That is amazing. And so I've always wanted to find, I have yet to find the family that ran movies for kids in their house. I think that's amazing. Like, all right, now we're going to show Shrek. And now at like 4 o'clock, we're going to show, I would love to find those people. But I did find one person who kind of used her house as a center for electricity. Her name's Maggie Milan.
First, a few of us had
This is
dinner
Maggie.
at Hudson Tavern. There's a funny picture of us on Facebook with all of our phones leaning over the table, tracking the Frankenstorm. And then we went home and sort of waited for the storm to hit. A bunch of us sort of stayed in the house and had a couple of drinks. We, against advice from the city, we left the house at about 9:30 at night, just when it was in the eye of the storm. And we went out to just go check it out and see what was going on. And I live on 12th Street, and we walked north to 13th Street, and there was water running with current and waves down 13th Street. And that was when I really grasped that there was something bigger than we expected happening. And so we walked 2 blocks west, I think, to Grand Street, and the same river was running down the back of the town, and then we got a little bit scared. The Wednesday after the storm, when we realized that the power wasn't going to come back on anytime soon, people started to bring their refrigerators over in bags, and it all ended up in my refrigerators because I had power. And I did not prepare for the storm at all. I had empty refrigerators, so it actually worked out just fine. And we had the power cords outside, and then everybody just started coming over. And by that time, I'd set up a quiet room on the 2nd floor, because on the day before, the house was just mayhem with people coming over to use the internet and the Wi-Fi and check their email and tell their family that they're okay. So we set up a quiet room upstairs with a conference table and power cords and the Wi-Fi password so that everybody could actually go to work, those people that had to work. And then everybody was downstairs just with plugging their stuff in. And then my friend Liz, who was running her business out of the quiet room, came downstairs about 4:30 and took an inventory of what was in the house and made dinner. And all of a sudden, we were feeding 50 people for dinner.
I talked to a lot of people as I was preparing this event, and I think a thing that stood out for many people is the role that our institutions of faith played in this community during and after Sandy. And I had an experience where I volunteered one night overnight. I did an overnight shift volunteering at the shelter that popped up at St. Matthew's, the Lutheran church. And there was a woman there, and her name's Rosemary Orozco, and I think she's sitting right over there. And Rose told me a story. She said that this elderly woman, and her nurse had been forced out of their building by the storm. And they'd come, and they needed a little privacy because the kind of daily administrations of care and dressing and just the things that you have to do in that state. You couldn't do it in the open, right? But how to create privacy? So luckily, Rose told me, there were some Stevens engineering students around, and they set to work doing what Stevens engineering students do, which is build stuff out of whatever is laying around. So, they took a chalkboard, and they took some trash, and suddenly they had 2 walls. And they put it around this woman, and they gave her the privacy that she needed. And to me, there was this lesson about how fragile we are, right? That our delicate bodies require care and privacy. And often the solution to that problem is so simple. But there has to be those people there to solve that problem. And luckily, there were often during Sandy. And I think we should also remember that our faith institutions are there doing that all the time. So that room where that happened at St. Matt's, that's where the soup kitchen in town happens every week, right? But to reflect for a moment on the role of faith in Sandy, we asked Monsignor Bob Meyer to come and talk to us. So, Father Meyer.
Thanks really for the kind invitation for coming tonight, and also thanks to Stevens and the historical group for putting this important event together. It's certainly a time for us to remember, to look back, and also to give thanks that we survived. I note again that my contribution to our gathering tonight is to speak about the place of faith. In its most basic definition, faith can be understood to mean these two words: to trust. I cannot think of a more appropriate definition than those two words regarding faith in the midst of the crisis or of a natural disaster, as we experienced in Superstorm Sandy. People who experience crisis in their lives quickly turn to those around them, to people, to organizations, to institutions that they can trust, because in so many cases, all else seems lost. One of my favorite quotes from the Catholic Church teaching is from the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, which says this: "The joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the people of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted, these are the joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the followers of Jesus." These words capture for me why St. Peter and Paul got involved to the extent that it did. Because as followers of Christ, each day we're provided with opportunities to care for one another and to be involved. And that's especially true when we face things like Superstorm Sandy. So, Mayor, I don't know if you remember, but when Mayor Zimmer called me on my cell phone the morning after the storm hit, I was already up and dressed and showered and walking down 4th Street to the waterfront to see for myself what was the extent of the damage. Well, the mayor's call stopped me in my tracks, and I never made it to the waterfront because her words turned me around and asked me to go back to the church to prepare for what would be both some interesting and very challenging days. I remember, Mayor, your words so vividly. You said, "Father Bob, are you in Hoboken?" And I think I said, "Where the hell do you think I am?" Because I have a cat. And so the cat needed me more than anything. I said, "Yes, Mayor, we have many, many good things." And she said, "Father Bob, we have many citizens who have been severely affected and many who are displaced and without food and shelter or electricity, and we need your help. Can we use the church for refuge to shelter some of those who are most in need?" I also remember my response to her: "Mayor, of course, you can have whatever you need. Send over your people, and they can meet with my people," but there were no people but me, "and we'll get it together. And then, Mayor, forget that we're here, because we'll handle our situation. You have many more bigger issues to be concerned with." The mayor called and asked us to help, and she did so in good faith. And as a community of faith, as a congregation of faith, we accepted that invitation. And we did the best we could to live up to her trust, because as the mayor, she spoke on behalf of the whole community in need. Initially, as I think back, those days might be what some called fun, because people were forced to rough it for a bit. No food, no electricity, no showers, no access to the internet, kind of like camping together in the big city. But as the days passed, it was unclear, and it was unclear when the situation would be remedied. The fun factor wore off pretty quickly, and we could see the stress and the frustration in people's faces. But even in those circumstances, people of faith trust. They trust in God, they trust in one another, they trust in institutions, and they trust in those folks who are committed to make society and communities better places. and that includes especially churches. Natural disasters demonstrate to us just how equal we all are. Because in the words of St. Paul to the Galatians, it became very clear to me, there is no Jew or Gentile, slave or free, no male or female, all are one. The hurricane reminded us that all of us were one, all affected, whether we were rich or poor, Catholic or not, private citizens or government officials, we were all in one way or another affected, despite who we were. I saw clearly on the floors of our church some of the wealthier members of our community who lived in some of the nicer apartments, as well as some of the ordinary people who are usually homeless. We were all in the same boat, so to speak. And so we sheltered and fed and showered and cared for more than 35 individuals and families who came to live with us for more than 2 weeks. We also extended our open door policy in the church to allow hundreds of people, and I mean hundreds of people, charge their cell phones, their smartphones, their iPads, their iPods, their tablets, it was an education for me in electronics. And to this day, I still probably have 100 power strips, multi-force things. So if I have it, please come. We have it on behalf of you. But the beautiful thing was that people came, and they were just together, sitting in the church, sitting on the floor, trusting in God, trusting in the mayor, trusting in the authorities, and trusting in one another in those very difficult days. That's what it meant to be people of faith. I spent countless hours myself in jeans and a sweatshirt, in the pews, on the steps, in the sanctuaries, with people who were really so grateful to us for what I believe was just ordinary care, ordinary concern to be a community of faith. I had one particularly hearty laugh. If you've ever been to our church, you know that the priest sits in what's called the presidential chair, and if this were the altar, it's kind of over there. And one morning I looked up, and there was a lady sitting in my chair with her leg over the side, reading the New York Times. And I thought, this captures it all. But it was a sign to us that all of us are welcome, and we were all in God's house where we all belonged to feel safe. And so in closing, I'd like to say that the people of our community, your community, trusted us, and we tried to live up to that sacred trust. And I hope that in each of our own lives, as we're given those opportunities to have faith, that is, to trust one another, that we continue to live up to that trust that we're given the opportunity for. So thanks.
Many of the institutions in town that normally give out care were themselves devastated during the storm, and they needed help. And one of these stories, I think, highlights the important interfaith tradition here in Hoboken. Because in the next interview, we interviewed April Harris of In Jesus' Name Charities, which runs the Hoboken Food Pantry. And as you'll hear, the food pantry was shattered by Sandy's flooding. And it was during that time that members of the United Synagogue of Hoboken, which is led by Rabbi Robert Scheinberg, stepped up to help. And in the video, you'll hear April mention this group, Nahamas, and it was a Jewish charity that was connected through the synagogue to help out April continue her work getting food to those in need, which she does every day.
Right before the storm, I was battening down the hatches of the church where I've run the ministry. It's in a basement at Our Lady of Grace. And Hurricane Irene had come the year before, so we moved a lot of stuff up to this upper floor and then put things up waist high, but then it turned out to be not so dramatic, so all I did was move things up waist high and then say a prayer and left. But the ministry feeds this community in their own food insecurity moments, and we have like 2,000 registered families and households, but usually like a 600 core that we have like strong relationships that are in the community, and so there was a lot of stuff there. And the way the water came into Hoboken, I really would never have expected it to go almost to the ceiling of the basement, but everything was gone. So I would say the most interesting thing that I learned was that charity was in everybody's hearts. It wasn't just me running this thing for the poor, and not that people don't share, but people really do rise up and share with people. I had people coming from Texas, Pennsylvania, all over the place, bringing resources. So my experience of Sandy was everything was gone, everything was ruined, the whole community was in an uproar. I was kind of trapped in my building as like a vortex of an intersection, freezing, cold, without electricity. But I didn't feel it at the time, just at night when I went home. And as fast as Nahamas was throwing out the debris outside, all the people were sharing, and I was able to use, with Father Alex Atwater's permission, the upper floor of which I took over temporarily. And the donations and the people and the kindness was just intersecting on the top.
I've missed a couple details in my talk, but I'm not going to go back and say all of them, but I want to point out that when it comes to the shelter at St. Matt's, that Rose stayed there all week long, basically, on a cot. Okay, she barely ever left the building, and she was really kind of a marker for me what dedication meant. All right, so Hoboken is also home to many young people involved in technology fields, whether they're programmers or hackers or makers or entrepreneurs or whatever they're calling themselves these days, right? But these people use their specific skills to help out others. And one of my favorite stories of technological innovation, right up there with the charging station for me, is the story of Hoboken Sandy maps. And I thought instead of having me tell you that story, I would have my friend, the founder and creator of Hoboken Sandy Maps, Dave Hayer, tell it to you. So please welcome Dave.
Good evening. In the days leading up to Sandy, maps became very much in the forefront in our household. My wife and I would look at the forecasts, and I'm very glad to find out today that we have the Davidson Lab to thank for the accuracy of that. But we looked at this and we tried to predict our timing, whether we were going to stay in town, whether we were going to leave town, when Sandy might hit, and where it might hit. And on the Saturday, we decided we're going to leave town. And when I say we left town, we went to Pittsburgh. And we figured there's no point going 15 miles down the road to a hotel to find out that the hotel is going to run out of power the next day. So some friends of ours and my wife and I, we went to Pittsburgh. We spent and watched the next 2 nights as Sandy hit. And as we woke up the morning after Sandy, we realized there was no way that we were going to be able to get back into our town anytime soon. And so my wife and I actually moved even further afield to Indiana, where her family is from, and the closest family we have in the area. So my experience is a little bit different than the folks that were hunkered down here and doing so much great work. And I realized, being so far away, that the best source of information for me was going online, going to Twitter and Facebook, and finding out these kind of stories. And you've seen these kind of similar stories mentioned all evening tonight. And that was really the inspiration for me. I figured if there were people in town that were kind enough to go out and do this kind of thing and provide power to their neighbors, if I were my neighbors sitting back on an 8th and Willow, how would they know that this was going on? And I was getting great information from Twitter and Facebook, but I also had the privilege and the ability to be able to sit in a home with power, with heat, with consistent internet access, and unless you're watching this stream of information going by, you miss a lot of it. So I built a map. I took information that I got from any sources I could, the daily updates from the city, from individuals tweeting, organizations sending messages on Facebook, and I tried to curate this as much as possible, dropping pins where food banks were, shelters were, My favorite, this was using Google Maps, so it's really not designed for this. So my favorite was the horse in the middle of the screen, and that's where there was pet food available. The only animal I could come up with. And very quickly, we ran into the limitations of this map. And so we built a second map. And when I say we now at this point, we had about 6 volunteers, some of the Stevens students. I actually have 2 of the volunteers here in the room, and if you don't mind indulging me for a moment, Alec Perkins and Deep Kapadia, if you wouldn't mind giving them a hand. And so this map became the Hoboken Power Map. And it became, I think, very important for people like me who were out of town, either before Sandy or immediately after Sandy, and trying to figure out when to come back into town, particularly with gas shortages and such. So as we got reports and we confirmed reports of a building going online, we would turn the pin to green. If we got more confirmed reports on a particular block, we would turn the whole block, and eventually the whole town. And sorry, I should say, we encourage people to use the hashtags we have up here, Hoboken Power and Hoboken Sandy Maps. And what really materialized is the 6 volunteers, there was no way we could keep up with looking at that information and all the other information that was going on at the time. So we really relied on the community that was out there. And very quickly, a huge number of individuals that were finding information out there and retweeting it or forwarding it to us. So it essentially was funneling this information in. And one of the folks that's written an article about us has referred to us as network of human sensors. And I love that. I think as we look at future crises, there's a huge opportunity to garner information from individuals and their individual experiences. And what we realized that there were communication issues in town and not everyone got access to our maps. But in the 4.5 days that we ran the maps, we had over 600,000 map views. So we're not stopping there. Deep, Alec, myself have been looking at this challenge and how we can make this better going forward. And there's kind of 2 challenges, or 2 opportunities, I think. This graph here represents what I'm told is about 38,000 tweets that mention Hoboken during the Sandy event, before and after. We max out at nearly 500 tweets an hour. So the great thing about social media is there's so much information that's available to us, and the bad thing about social media is there's so much information that's available to us, right? So one of the challenges we're looking at is we have all of this information, and we're looking at hour by hour, day by day, what were the key terms that people were mentioning? What was the rich media that they were providing? And one of the things that we're looking at is how could we do this in a post-event analysis, but also how we could potentially do this in real time or near time in a future event. The other thing that we're working on right now is streamlining our process. So the Google Maps that I mentioned earlier isn't really designed for crisis. They have crisis maps, and we've been in conversations with the Google folks. But we're also looking at developing, we're in the middle of developing a dashboard so that volunteers can watch the stream on the left-hand side. If there are messages that might be relevant to be put on a crisis map, they select the information. There's location information that can be pulled from there, and then we can categorize it and move on to the next message. So we called ourselves Hoboken Sandy Maps. Obviously, that's a one-time event, a one-time name. And so I'm glad to announce today that we will be continuing as the Hoboken Crisis Map. We hope never to have to use it. So I'm very eager to talk to the community and see potentially what other uses in a non-emergent event that could be for this kind of system. We'll be updating our website shortly, but you can go to hobokencm.org to find out some more information. And certainly please follow us on Twitter at HobokenCM. And then lastly, this is an open source project. So any developers in the room, please follow us on GitHub, and you can, we'd love to have more people get involved. Thank you.
The tech community was not only involved in the immediate response, but also, I mean, we see it already here in Dave's talk, is thinking about the recovery and also the longer term, right? How to make the city stronger and be more prepared for the future. And when I think about someone who kind of crosses all of these points when it comes to Sandy in the tech community, the first person that comes to my mind is the tech entrepreneur, Aaron Price. And we asked him here tonight, and please come up, Aaron.
Thanks for having me. What are we calling ourselves these days? Certainly not technology historians. That's a pretty cool title. So, my name is Aaron Price, and I'm a technology entrepreneur, and it can be a relatively lonely experience. And I've had a few businesses, some successful, a couple failures, but I've learned along the way that it can be a relatively lonely process. And so 3.5 years ago, I started something called the New Jersey Tech Meetup to try to help prevent it from being a lonely process at the company I started, at least around that time. And so I was imagining something that would be sort of 20 guys in a room in a bar talking about, employee issues that they had that month, and not really necessarily turning into this large organization. But it turns out that it kind of did. We're 3,200 members now, the largest technology group in the state. And we've gotten a bunch of press from companies like Fast Company and the Wall Street Journal and Beta Beat, and we were in the street last week, actually kind of relevant to the whole evening, is that the mayor was mentioned in Twitter's IPO. You may have heard they're going public, in how the town used Twitter as a tool to communicate. So it's a very relevant topic to what we're trying to accomplish. And again, wasn't trying to build an organization. We actually won Hoboken Business of the Year last year, which was kind of cool. So this thing took on a life of its own, and we built this community that was really engaged. And then, as you may have seen this picture or something similar, Sandy hit. And it really affected this community, or the technology community, in a big way. For many of them, I was their connection. A lot of people come from around the tri-state area. Actually, I'm proud to say every month we've had someone internationally join the group, which is kind of cool. And I forgot to mention a whole piece of it. It's hosted here at Stevens. We do networking, 3 startups pitch, and then we have a feature speaker. And so generally we get about 200 people a month somewhere at Stevens. And we've had speakers of companies you've probably heard of, like Priceline, and Hot Jobs, and Razorfish, and several prominent VCs. So it's a really fantastic group to learn a lot in a short amount of time. But for a lot of people in the community, I was their connection to Hoboken, and they were seeing what was going on, and they started sending me all sorts of messaging, which is really moving. But personally, we were generally all right. I don't know if you can see it too well, but those are 2 headlamps. It's my wife reading our daughter a story to go to sleep. But we were generally okay, and learned a few things. Personally, some social experiments for us, like seeing empty grocery stores was kind of an interesting experience in the gentle balance of society and how things could get out of control. But we were able to deal with it, made called our DIY fridge, and as things melted, grilled them, and we were generally okay. And I wanted to do more. Once I kind of got my family stable, we didn't have power for a while, but the moment that I did, I wanted to see if I could leverage the power of what was now this large technology group to do something else. So the first thing I did was I sent around an email to the entire group, which at the time was probably around 2,000 people, and just said, if you have something to offer, or if you need help, post it to this group, and we'll send it around, just because it's a means of communication. And we had dozens and dozens of offers. The group actually helped a woman whose entire home was flooded get all of her belongings out of the house. People offered office space and shelter and kids' movie nights and things like that. So that was a good first step. Relatively easy for us to set up. The mayor, maybe Daniel, called and said, we're having this problem where we can't figure out all the electrical supplies that we need, and the people who still are out of power, can you help us do something? And so we did something and built basically a fancy web form to gather the information of people who were still out of power, and try to streamline all that information into one place, which was great and very gratifying and cool. And I appreciate you thinking of us for that. I'm glad we were able to help out. But I wanted to do more to empower the community, because it felt like there was something that we could do with technology that could be more effective. And so I recruited a few people, and we built healhoboken.org. And what we did was this was a fundraising campaign to sell t-shirts like the one I'm wearing here, and hoodies, and all the proceeds of our sales were to go to the Hoboken Relief Fund. And I thought maybe we'd raise $1,000 or $5,000 or who knows what, but I didn't think it would be a ton. And what was really cool is that this whole thing came together from people in the community who, just a few years prior, I had no idea who they were. So, up there you have a graphic designer and a software developer and a PR person and a social media person. And so everyone lent their individual expertise so that we could build something much greater. in record time. And so we launched this thing, and then all this social media coverage from our community started to happen. This is probably one of my favorite tweets about the event, or about the project. This guy wrote, "Every payday I transfer a certain amount of money to my savings. This time I donated to healhoboken.org and the Red Cross. You should too." Which kind of embodied the whole spirit of what the technology community was trying to do, to try to help one another out. And much of the spirit that we've heard tonight about how people responded. And then some media picked it up. So we were in the Ledger, and we were on, I was on the radio. Even though I didn't have any power, I figured out a way to get on the radio, and Meetup put us on their homepage, and the Hudson Reporter picked it up, and New Jersey Tech Weekly, and Fox News put it in that small section of their site that they put facts, and we were on Facebook for a while. Or we had a lot of likes on Facebook. So it was a pretty amazing response to something that came together really, really quickly. And then local businesses rallied around it. And so local bars said we could use them to help fulfill, and Red Stage helped rebuild the site. And Magento, which is an eBay company, donated an e-commerce license. It's like a $20,000 license normally, for free, so we can have a more robust experience. Springboard PR jumped in to do a lot of the PR. So again, it was not just the individuals, but now we were seeing some local businesses saying, what they could do to get involved and help out with this effort. And so, as a technology entrepreneur, speed is kind of king, and we use some open source tools to launch a pretty basic project, but something that had a lot of power. So from idea to launch, it was 36 hours. We announced it at 1:13 a.m., and we had our first order 3 minutes later, which I thought was pretty cool. So by the first day, which was basically that represented Monday a.m. So by Monday at 12:50 noon, we raised $3,000. By the end of the first day, we were at $9,000. Within 2 weeks, we were at $32,063, which I thought was pretty awesome. And we sold 511 pieces to 23 different states. So this is something that wasn't just to the Hoboken area, but we shipped to Maine and Rhode Island and California and Tennessee and Minnesota. So it was really interesting to see, and we'd get notes too, like, "Oh, my friend, used to live there after college, and I used to visit her and drink a lot, and so I want to support the town." It's remarkable how much "drink a lot" there was in the messages. But it was great to see people rally around something that they really cared about. And so it turns out when you sell 511 pieces, you have to ship those things. And I don't live out of a warehouse, but it turns out that a fraternity house makes a great fulfillment center. And so Idan and his fine brothers at Phi Sig Cap, right here at Stevens, yes, they deserve a round of applause. They stepped up and took all 511 items and got them into every single person's hands, which was actually, that was almost as much, that was probably more effort than putting the thing together. So that was a huge piece. And again, representing, now we had the community members within the group, the businesses within the group, and now students stepping in to say, well, we could probably ship those. We have a big living room and no alcoholic drinks to keep us busy. So it was a really moving experience for me. And what we learned was, that technology could empower the community to be part of this effort. And this sort of restored my faith in humanity, and it was a really moving thing for me to be involved with. So I was really, really proud to just be part of the effort. I don't see it being, having led it, but just kind of sparked the process to let people take it from there. But we're not quite done yet. So here we are a year later, and a few of us have teamed up to launch what we're calling Mile Mesh. So it's using a mesh network for the mile square city to have a public Wi-Fi system, starting with the need of which is originally aimed for emergency preparedness, but could extend beyond that. And so we can install those small antennas on people's balconies, roofs, and in windows, and if enough people around town do it, we can actually provide Wi-Fi all around town. So we have 50 volunteers. We've got a grant from NYC Wireless. We've got some pretty cool things going on there. If you want to volunteer, and if you're sitting here, you probably should volunteer. You should go to milemesh.com, and we'd love your support. The other thing is that I get a lot of questions. We happen to live across from one of the large tech epicenters of the country and maybe the globe. But so I'm frequently getting this question of who cares about what's going on in New Jersey? What's going on in the technology world in New Jersey? It's not really relevant. And I'm constantly defending that, no, I swear, there's some good stuff going on here. So we're building something called The Mapped. So if you are involved in technology, or for someone who is involved in technology, they can pin themselves to this map, that they're a software developer, or that they represent a co-working space, or a school, or a startup company. So that if you live in, the middle of, let's say you're in West Orange and you're wondering what's going on in my neighborhood, you could use a tool like this to say, oh, there actually are lots of people involved in technology right here in my backyard. There's an event coming up. There's an investor down the street. There are things going on that are not just Silicon Alley and Silicon Valley. So I encourage you to help spread the word, because this could be a very powerful tool to enable people who are involved in technology, that it's not just about a few select cities. There's much more to it. And so with that, there's a kind of I mentioned that entrepreneurship can be a very lonely thing, but it takes a lot of determination, perseverance, very similar to the sort of things that it takes to get through a devastating event like Hurricane Sandy. And so there was a motto that we put on every sticker, every T-shirt, every hoodie, and that went out with all our tweets, and I think it represents really well. Probably what Eugene was talking may be a better motto for the campaign, rather than that we're unsinkable, or rather than no stronger than the storm, is instead that no storm can sink us. Thank you very much.
So I tease my techie friends, but it's only because I'm one of them. And Stevens, of course, is part of the tech community here in town as well. And there's many people on campus who've been working hard since Sandy came to improve things and plan for the future. And you've already heard a bit about Alan Bloomberg's research. You saw his model earlier. He's been building other models like this based on physics and the data he records from the Hudson River. He's currently building a map, a Google map, that uses people's photographs taken from out of their house during the storm to kind of validate models. And I know they're looking, so if you click on one of these pins, you get a photo, right? And I know they're looking for photos from people in the community. They'd be very happy to talk to anyone who did take photos during that time. So please talk to them at the reception after this. And then he has farther future vision. So one question from a tech person's view is, how do you get people to take threats seriously? And one idea is to build something into Google, like Google Street View, so that, as you're waiting for the days for this thing to arrive, like, where is the water going to be on your street, right? And you could just look at Google Street View and it's like, well, okay, it's going to be up to that purple line, but the uncertainty envelope there, that's starting to look scary, right? So maybe I should head home. And that would be kind of like using people's self-caring skills, resiliency, to head out of town, right? So there's a lot of things going on campus. And to toot our horn for a second, I'm a part of the Science and Technology Studies program here. I'm a historian of technology. The STS program is led by Andy Russell, another historian of technology. And we think about the social and political dynamics of technology and science. And I've been working in disaster studies more since Sandy happened. I taught a course last semester called Sandy Studies. And so I think this is to end this little bit, this is the message, and I think this is part of what the president's going to say too, is that when it comes to Stevens, right, and Hoboken, we just want everyone to know that we are here. And we are a partner for this community, okay? And we want you to see us in that way. Okay. All right, and now I'd like to invite 3 people to the stage who have continued working on community issues related to Sandy, whether that's in memorializing the storm for history or aiding in recovery, and they also helped co-sponsor this event. So please welcome Robert Foster of the Hoboken Historical Museum, Daniel Altilio of the United Way, and Dawn Donnelly.
Okay. Again, I wanted to thank Nariman Farvarden for this great opportunity. Thank you. I think it's a great blend of, shall we say, from the heart, from the people. When we saw Maria and Madeline talking, and it sort of came from nowhere, and you realize right to the heart. And then to hear the technology balance with that, it's pretty unusual. And I think that's a great combination, which we don't see that often. It's usually one or the other. And what a balance. And I really feel it tonight. When we, I'm not really sure when we decided we would do an exhibit at the museum on Sandy. I do remember Eugene raising a lot of money at our last hoedown, and it was for the exhibit. So I guess it was around that time. But sometimes Eugene kind of takes charge, and hence it follows. But I'm really glad he did. Many times one shies away from anniversary events because they get a little too sentimental, or you feel you have to do it. But this is one we did have to do. And so the way we started actually was by doing oral histories with people in the community. We started with the mayor, we started with Chief Bloom, we started with Chief Falco, and then we started looking geographically around the town of people who could tell their story. We did about 20 of them. We had them professionally transcribed. We had gotten a grant from the New Jersey Historical Commission. They will become part of the state archive records, and I'm really proud of that project. I remember talking to Eddie Madigan, who ran the program at the Elks, I have to give credit to a couple other people who he worked with, because I don't think he's here tonight, he'd be really upset. And I'm not finding their names, but I knew it was like Bill Noonan, Tom Foley, and a few other folks. And what they did was pretty amazing. They like to hang out together. They have the Elks facility, and once they found that their family was safe, their cats were safe, they decided we're going to hang out at the Elks and just make a go of it. And they were there for the whole week. They served food 12 hours a day. And Eddie Madigan, I've seen him a couple times where he's, kicking out someone from the bar down below, and I didn't know him that well, and I go, whoa, I don't want to cross this guy. But when you interview him, and he has a tear in his eye, and he talks about that was the best day of his life, but he knew it was also the worst day for many people, you get kind of weepy. And that does come out in the transcriptions. We do have audio files you can listen. April Harris, who's like the closest thing we have to a missionary in Hoboken, she spoke on tape in Jesus' name. She talks about how basically she needed to be rescued. And that's kind of an amazing story she talks about. And what I learned from listening to the transcriptions is that once you are safe, once your cat is safe, once you're not worried about, maybe, your mom or dad who might be in town, that you kind of owe it to yourself to help your neighbor. And April Harris does that every day, but we should be doing it at least in a crisis situation like that. So that's what I learned from the transcripts. I did mean to say we do have an exhibit in the museum that's up until July 6th. We hope that you come visit this museum. Many people don't know we exist, but I do recognize a lot of people in the crowd. We're at 1301 Hudson Street. We have a nice little local history museum that is really part of the community, but we know we need to reach more people. HobokenMuseum.org is a great place to find out what's going on. The best thing is to walk in the door. We're open 40 hours a week. And if this exhibit doesn't involve you, because we do all have that common denominator of having gone through that storm last year, I can't imagine you won't be affected by this exhibit. So thank you again for this opportunity. Beth McGrath, Diana Colombo, Lee Vinzel, you put together a great program. One of the good things that came out of this storm for the museum is this connection with Stevens, which we hope to propel in the future. So thank you for your hospitality. I'm going to now welcome Danny Attilio from United Way of Hudson County, who does great things for Hudson County. Again, thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, everyone, for everyone's work in relationship to this horrible occasion of 1 year ago today when Hurricane Sandy hit. United Way has been in Hudson County working for 78 years, and we work in different areas. And Hurricane Sandy was very challenging for every nonprofit in the entire community, just because of the sheer size and response that was needed. And there's no time really to prepare for all of that. Tonight you heard, tonight and today we heard a lot about the health of technology, and we took care of the health of technology. We need all of the technology that Stevens is putting together and has, because the communication is so important for the coordination of relief services. So the health of technology is very important. You heard from the mayor and others about people's physical health. Were you safe? Did you get water? Did you get food? Are you in danger? Can we take you to the shelter? Can we bring you back home? People's physical health was taken care of on that day and in the initial phase of it. We want to make sure everyone is okay. And we heard from Monsignor Myers about our spiritual health. People were praying during that storm because we've never seen anything like it. It was just totally amazing, and you think you're safe, and then all of a sudden you see things that you've never seen in the past, and people became frightened. People prayed. People continued to pray and pray for each other. So our spiritual health was also very, very important. That brings us to our mental health, and that's an extended component of recovery. Recovery doesn't happen in an instant. It happens and it takes a long time. And it is the mental health aspect of it that United Way wanted to step in with right now with the museum here in Hoboken. And as Bob was speaking about putting the Sandy exhibit together, we chatted, and you're going to have school children there. You're going to have different people who witness this. You're going to have first responders. And how great would it be if we could put some sort of counseling in line with that for everyone who might need that? United Way was very ill-prepared for September 11th. And our office, we watched the whole thing, and we responded. And we worked with the families and the survivors and helped them through everything for about a year. And we, $2.6 million in aid and checks. We did 550 cases of people who were affected by September 11th. And it was about 8 months to a year later, if you remember, HBO put a special on television about the horrible events of September 11th, and they gave you the warning, it's very raw, be prepared. So I started watching that, and all of a sudden I felt like I got hit by a train. I started sobbing uncontrollably, and it never happened before, where you just couldn't stop yourself. And I really realized the impact, even as people who are supporting people who went through it. So post-traumatic stress and these type of things, sometimes you don't know. And with an exhibit that the museum is doing, it would just be great if we could make sure that if services are needed, they are there. And with that, I'd like to bring up Dawn Donnelly, who is, I don't drink, I promise, our coordinator.
Thanks, Dan. I am a disaster relief crisis counselor. Our role with the DRCC is to come in right after a disaster hits, terrorist attack hits, and we basically go in immediately, and we help people to try to minimize the damage of the mental health damage. We try to be very supportive, and you would be surprised what a glass of water, a warm smile, a pair of gloves will do to somebody. And I think the goal of that is to make sure that the after effects of that storm doesn't lead to bigger emotional problems. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, and for many, it's not until 6 to 12 months after the event occurs that people realize that they really have suffered from PTSD, really. I responded firsthand to the hurricane. I went to many different shelters in the community. It was very sad. It was very sad to see what people went through. You don't realize how lucky you are when you see people being displaced from their homes and stuff like that. But with that, of course, comes as the whole theme of today has been, is how the community comes together and how a little bit of that hate goes away and people just are there to lend a helping hand and to be there for everybody. And you see all that goodness that I always believed is inside of people comes out during this time. I am running the program. I have partnered with United Way and the Hoboken Museum, and we are running several programs. We are doing an adult program every other Thursday evening from 7 to 8 at the Hoboken Museum. That's more for adults. To some of the topics that we'll be discussing is, how to talk to children about disasters, coping skills, tell your Sandy story. So that's some of the topics that we'll be discussing. And then I'm going in with an intern of mine, and we are going to the Jubilee Center and the Boys and Girls Club and working with the children. We have different activities planned through play therapy to get the children to talk, to share their stories, and to provide some kind of comfort for them as well. In addition to that, I have an office set up at the Hoboken Museum. They also built a beautiful serenity room for me with a couch and stuff. So I'm there to meet with people one-on-one. I've already had people start to reach out to me. I've given out my personal cell phone, so I could be reached at any time via email or my phone as well. We did run our first group with the children at the Jubilee Center, and it went very well. We did Rebuilding Our Community, and the kids just absolutely loved it. They got very excited about it, and got to see what was very special to them. McDonald's was a very big hit, as well as nail salons and spas. So it was really great. At the museum also, they built for me what's called a comfort zone, where you can come in and you can write down what brings you peace, what brings you comfort. Because when things like this happen, it's those things that make us feel better. It brings us peace. So I hope during this time that I will get to bring some of that peace and some of that comfort back to the Hoboken community. I look forward to working with actually the whole Hudson County community, and I look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
I'm just going to say a couple things to conclude, and then the president's going to come up and say some final words for us. But before I do that, I'd like to thank a few people. I'd like to really help all those people who helped me put this together, especially Christopher Robinson, who did all the great videos you saw today. They're just absolutely amazing. So thank you, Christopher. And of course, I'd like to thank all of our speakers and those who agreed to be interviewed too. So thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. All right, I want to keep this short because you guys have been sitting for a long time, and I'm going to start off somewhere kind of goofy. So stick with me for a second. But we live in a society. This is a true fact. Okay, we live in a society where some of the most popular stories in the media today involve zombies. Okay. And for some reason, for entertainment, we prefer apocalypse, right? We like to watch the world end, all right? And there's a social critic alive today, one of the most popular social critics in academia, who's argued that we've lost the ability to imagine a better future, that we don't write utopias anymore, okay? And if something has gone wrong in our society, it's that our imaginations have lost the ability to be hopeful. But I think that when Sandy struck, we did see such fundamentally hopeful, even utopian acts of imagination. And people used their creativity to envision and create a better world for one another. And we saw this visionary imagining when people did silly, easy things, some unthinkable things. So they just threw an extension cord out to the street and connected to a power strip. All right? We saw it when people rose above their personal dramas to wonder, what's going on with other people? Should I go help them? We saw it when Dave Hare was like sitting in his hotel room thinking, what's going on? What can I do for people? All right? We saw it when Eugene Flynn and his staff, right, used their craft to cook French fries and take them out to the sidewalk. And we saw these fundamentally hopeful acts in so many other instances during Sandy, okay? And I'm not Pollyanna, right? I'm not saying like we don't have problems. There's tons of things we're facing today as a society that are tough. And I have no idea what, if they'll ever be resolved, right? They probably won't be. But here's what I do know. I do know that if we can take a bit of what we learned from Sandy and hold on to how we responded, that really would be a good, great thing, okay? So 1 year ago tonight, Sandy came in. In fact, I think in 5 or 10 minutes is when the lights went off, okay? And tonight here we've remembered that, we've marked that together. And for the rest of the week, we're going to be marching through that week that we held together, right? And this is all I would ask you. As you march through that week and beyond, when you think of Sandy, I would just ask you to remember what we did. Just what we did. That's it. Thank you.
Professor Winsel, thank you very much for your nice concluding remarks, and thank you for keeping this program on schedule. It's almost exactly 9 o'clock. We were going to wrap up at 9 o'clock. Let me actually make one important announcement before I make any concluding remarks. And that announcement is probably the most important part of tonight's comments. There is dessert after this event. You've been sitting quietly and patiently, and some of you I know haven't had much to eat. So there is a dessert reception, thanks to goodies provided by Seduxo and by Carlo's Bakery at the Babio Center, at the atrium of the Babio Center. Now that you know that I am the only thing between you and dessert, I'll keep my comments very brief. I want to sort of capture the essence of what Lee said by reminding all of us that we have gathered here tonight to remember a disaster, really of almost biblical proportions. But actually, that disaster gave us the opportunity to find out how beautiful we are as a community. It is unfortunate that we need opportunities like a natural disaster to extract the beauty out of our people. But it's also nice that we had this opportunity to find out how close and how solid a community we have. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. I want to thank everybody who spoke. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Father Bob. Thank you, everybody else, for speaking. Thank you, all of the people who gave us your time to be filmed prior to the event. These video clips were really telling, and they brought tears to our eyes. But let me also thank all of the people who worked hard to put the program together. A lot of people have worked hard. And originally I was thinking of not mentioning the names, but I think I should. If I leave out some names, I ask for your forgiveness. Lee Winsel, thank you again. You did a lot, and I appreciate it very much. Great job. And I'm going to read a series of names. Please hold your applause until the very end. Christopher Robinson's name was mentioned before. Christopher, thank you again for what you've done. Michael Hoffman, Laura Bubeck, Paul Carr, Stacy Green, Carolina Chang, David Zimmerman, Michelle Nunez, Chief of Police Tim Griffin, Professor Alan Blumberg, who's been busy for a long, long time organizing the events of today, and Dean Michael Bruno, as well as Bob Foster and his wonderful team at the Hoboken Historical Museum. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Beth McGrath, for thinking of this activity. And thank you, the City of Hoboken. We look forward to having a closer partnership with the city in good events and bad events. Thank you all very much, and see you at the dessert.